Hello, it's Scotland at 7. Thank you for joining me. I'm Hugh Stewart and I'm in the Glasgow studio. Tonight it's Wednesday, the 27th of April, and that brings us to day 63 of Russia's illegal occupation of attack on Ukraine. I'm going to begin with the updates from that story. Firstly, Russia will stop supplying gas to Poland and Bulgaria from Wednesday. Warsaw has refused to pay its supplier Gazprom in rubles and earlier announced that it was imposing sanctions on 50 entities and individuals, including Russia's biggest gas company. Bulgaria, which is almost completely reliant on Russian gas imports, said it had fulfilled all its contractual obligations with Gazprom and that the proposed new payment scheme was in breach of their agreement. Andriy Yermak, Chief of Staff to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, said Russia was beginning the gas blackmail of Europe. Russia's defence ministry warned of an immediate proportional response if Britain continues its direct provocation of the Kyiv regime after the UK Armed Forces Minister James Heappey described Ukrainian strikes on Russian soil, which hit supplies and disrupted logistics, as completely legitimate. Volodymyr Zelensky said he believes Russia is trying to destabilize the situation in Moldova's Transnistria region after a series of explosions there, adding that Ukrainian armed forces were ready for a possible escalation by Russian troops in the temporarily occupied territory. The goal is obvious: to destabilize the situation in the region, to threaten Moldova. They show that if Moldova supports Ukraine, there will be certain steps, President Zelensky said in his latest national address. Russia has refused to rule out Moldova's breakaway region Transnistria being drawn into the Ukraine war. Zelensky added, "The free world has the right to self-defense," after predicting that Russia intends to not only seize the territory of Ukraine, but to dismember the entire centre and east of Europe and deal a global blow to democracy, in the words of President Zelensky there. Germany will authorise the delivery of 50 anti-aircraft systems to Ukraine, the German Defence Minister Christine Lambrecht said. Frau Lambrecht said that the government had agreed to sign off the delivery of around 50 Gepard anti-aircraft weapons and systems. Switzerland said it had blocked Germany from sending Swiss-made ammunition used in Gepard anti-aircraft systems to Ukraine. Australia will send 6 M777 howitzers and ammunition to Ukraine as part of a $26.7 million Australian dollars package in its response to what they called Russia's brutal, unrelenting and illegal invasion. A statement from Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Defence Minister Peter Dutton said on Wednesday, earlier today, Canada aims to send 8 armoured vehicles as quickly as possible, according to Defence Minister Anita Anand. Russia has dismissed Ukraine's proposal to stage peace talks in Mariupol. Sergei Lavrov said it was too early to talk about who would mediate in any negotiations, but he said Moscow was committed to a diplomatic solution via talks on Ukraine. The head of United Nations atomic watchdog has condemned the Russian occupation of the Chernobyl nuclear plant, describing it as very, very dangerous. The International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the IAEA, Director General Rafael Grossi, is heading an expert mission there to deliver equipment, conduct radiological assessments, and restore safeguards and monitoring systems. President Zelensky said no one in the world can feel safe after Russia threatened Ukraine's nuclear facilities and called for global control over Russia's nuclear facilities and technology, after meeting with the Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Mariano Grossi. No other country in the world since 1986 has posed such a major threat to nuclear security to Europe and to the world, he said. And more on the Gazprom story today. Russia has been accused of seeking to blackmail Europe as the energy giant Gazprom confirmed it had halted gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria and was preparing to target other countries. The Kremlin said the dramatic move, widely seen as an attempt to weaponize Russia's energy supplies, was a response to the failure by the 2 EU countries to make their payments in rubles. The immediate consequence of Gazprom's decision was a 20% rise in wholesale gas prices, driving it almost 7 times higher than a year ago and hitting the pockets of consumers across the continent. Vladimir Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said other countries could also lose supply in a warning shot to governments across Europe, including Germany, where officials admitted to being worried. The EU imports around 40% of its gas from Russia. A spokesperson for the German Economic Ministry said, "We are seeing with concern that there has been a stop of deliveries to European partner countries. We are coordinating closely with the European Union to consolidate the situation." Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, condemned Moscow's move but said that fellow EU countries and the US had already come to Poland and Bulgaria's aid. Bulgaria's Energy Minister Alexander Nikolov said that Russia was weaponizing its dominant position in gas and oil supply. The Polish gas company PGNiG confirmed that supply had indeed stopped, but a spokesperson said its clients were still getting the fuel in line with their needs. Russia supplies about 55% of Poland's annual demand of about 21 billion cubic meters of gas, but Poland is far more reliant on coal to heat homes and to fuel industry, with gas accounting for only 90% of its overall energy mix. Russian imports account for more than 90% of Bulgaria's gas needs, but their government insisted that no restrictions would be imposed on domestic gas consumption for the moment. The only EU leader who has suggested that he would pay Gazprom in rubles is Hungary's Viktor Orban, whose right-wing government has pursued a close relationship with Putin's regime for more than a decade. Excuse me. And more on the UK government's proposal to process their asylum seekers, not in England, but in Rwanda, 4,000 miles away. The charity Freedom from Torture has begun a legal challenge with regard to Priti Patel's proposal to remove asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing, a decision which they claim is contrary to international law. Lee Day, the solicitors acting on their behalf, have requested the documents through Freedom of Information legislation. These documents would include the detail of the policy, including risk assessment and a memorandum of understanding between the UK and Rwanda. No details have been issued regarding the policy by the Home Office, and the Home Secretary took the unusual step of issuing a rare ministerial direction to overrule civil servants' concerns about whether the scheme would deliver value for money. Patel has been the subject of judicial concerns regarding the failure to disclose policy documents she has put forward, including those pertaining to the confiscation of phones from newly arrived refugees, and contentious plans to insist that border force officials push back boats bringing refugees across the Channel. Critics such as the SNP's Shadow Home Secretary Stuart MacDonald MP have blasted the UK government for pressing ahead with what he called a gruesome bill on nationality and borders. He's also accused them of breaking their own manifesto promise and compounding the problem with this proposal to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Mr MacDonald also commented that in the 2019 Tory manifesto there was a commitment to protecting refugees and granting asylum to those facing persecution and oppression. This manifesto promise made no mention of the offshoring or offloading responsibility onto developing countries to which they have absolutely no connection. He went on to say that the UK has clear humanitarian responsibilities which it should fulfil. Sonia Skeets, chief executive of Freedom from Torture, is also quoted as saying, "The outpouring of compassion for those fleeing Ukraine and Afghanistan has shown that the public want people seeking safety to be welcomed. We shouldn't have to resort to legal action for this government to treat people with basic human dignity, and yet here we are again." Analysis of the government's own figures has shown that less than 200 people would have been sent to Rwanda last year under this proposal, and that even this number is likely to be even less this year, casting doubts on the efficacy of the scheme. Excuse me. And now an EU story again, which we've covered before. Scottish Government Employment Minister Richard Lochhead has said that Scotland is losing out following the launch of the UK government's so-called Shared Prosperity Fund, which replaces the previous EU structural funds. He stated that funds of £183 million per year would be required to replace the EU funding in full, and yet the UK government is offering much less than that, in fact a drop of over 60%. Additionally, Mr Lockhead pointed out that this fund would be fully administered from Westminster. Therefore, third sector and local community groups would not be in a position to influence the dispersal of funds as would have been the case before. Support for his position comes from the Scottish Green Party, who stated that the Shared Prosperity Fund is a misnomer and reveals the true cost of Brexit. Green spokesperson Maggie Chapman said the Tories have never have and never will show any desire to share prosperity, and we've seen over the pandemic that they're more interested in directing public money to their friends than tackling poverty and redistributing wealth across the country. And now a story on the economic crisis and food banks. The SNP has today slammed the UK government for driving millions into absolute poverty, with new figures showing that over 2 million people across the UK required food parcels last year. The figures released by the Russell Trust Network show that over 2 million parcels were distributed to people facing financial hardship over the last 12 months, and that's an increase of 14% over the previous year. 830,000 parcels were delivered to children alone, as the Trust confirmed that they had just had the busiest winter ever, apart from during the worst of the pandemic. Emma Revie, the chief executive of the Russell Trust, said that people are skipping meals in order to feed their children. Criticising the UK government, she asked, "How can this be right in a society like ours?" Kirsty Blackman MP, who is the SNP's Work and Pensions spokesperson, said that the UK government should hang their heads in shame, adding that UK had the worst poverty and inequality in North West Europe and the highest in-work poverty this century. Ms Blackman blamed this on the policies of the Conservative government, citing austerity, callous cuts, stagnating wages and Brexit. In contrast, Ms Blackman pointed out to the record of the Scottish government, which had upgraded the range of Holyrood-delivered benefits by 6% and also doubled the Scottish child payment, which is now standing at £20. That will £20 per child per week. That is, of course, going to go up to £25 when it's extended to all children under 16 later on this year. Meanwhile, the UK government has slashed universal credit by £20 and increased taxes on the country's lowest earners. Kirsty Blackman concluded by saying that only an independent Scotland would have the powers to make food banks a thing of the past and to build a fairer and more prosperous future. To Westminster now, further to the misogynistic treatment of Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, which was an article published in last week's Mail on Sunday, using information purporting to have come from some Tory MPs. It has emerged that a front-bench Tory MP has been reported to the government's chief whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, at a meeting attended by more than a dozen of his female colleagues, one of whom stated that he was observed viewing porn while in the chamber of the House of Commons and in other parts of the building. An investigation into this behaviour has been launched, and the MP has not yet been named. The Mail on Sunday editor has refused a request by the Speaker of the House of Commons to attend a meeting with him to discuss the article on Angela Rayner. Hacked Off, the group representing victims of phone hacking, has pointed out that IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, has never upheld a single complaint of sexism in its 8 years of existence. It has also been reported that Prime Minister Johnson is uncomfortable with the idea of a member of the press lobby being called to a meeting with the Speaker, suggesting that it interferes with the freedom of the press. Today in Parliament, the Prime Minister agreed with Caroline Lucas of the Green Party that evidence of sexual misconduct should be grounds for dismissal. These issues have flared up at a time when 56 current members of Parliament, including several ministers and some shadow ministers, are being investigated for sexual misconduct. The investigation is ongoing, and we will advise of the outcome when it comes. And now today, a ruling on care home deaths at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. In London today, in the High Court, in a new ruling, the UK government was found to have broken the law by discharging untested hospital patients into care homes at the start of the COVID infection. The ruling, which dealt with a complaint from two bereaved relatives, states that the UK government policies contained in documents from March and April 2020 were unlawful because the advice did not take into account the risk of non-symptomatic transmission of the virus within care homes. Lord Justice Bean and Justice Garnham, Mr Justice Garnham, said that the UK Health Secretary at the time, Matt Hancock, did not seem to have considered the question of risk to care home residents, although they state that there was a growing awareness that asymptomatic transmission could pose a serious threat. In fact, the SAGE Advisory Group had addressed this concern earlier in February 2020. However, it wasn't until mid-April that hospital patients had to be tested before being sent to care homes. A spokesman for Matt Hancock, who claimed that the UK government had put a protective ring, as he put it, around care homes, said that he had acted reasonably, but that Public Health England had failed to tell ministers what they knew about asymptomatic transmission. The Scottish Government had followed the same advice on discharging patients into care homes at the start of the pandemic and has appointed a senior judge, Lady Poole, to conduct the official inquiry into that policy. Glasgow solicitor Amar Anwar, who's representing Scottish bereaved relatives, said today that although the High Court decision relates to England and Wales, the Scottish Government and health managers should, as he put it, take no comfort from that, as they made exactly the same catastrophic mistakes which led to the loss of life. By the end of March 2021, there were 3,774 deaths in Scottish care homes. 3,774. To put that into context, today I checked, there's about 12,000 deaths in total in Scotland. Mr Anwar described care homes as a petri dish for the COVID-19 virus, and Mr Anwar recalled that Deputy First Minister John Swinney had promised a full inquiry, and he said that the Scottish Government must not try to avoid scrutiny by hiding behind today's High Court decision. He is advising bereaved clients on the possibility of further legal action to investigate what he called preventable deaths which took place in our care homes. Now, we're moving on to the story of sanctions, against Hungary. The European Union has today taken steps against the government of Hungary for various complaints that Hungary has been breaking with European Union law. This is an unprecedented move which could lead to Hungary losing out on EU funding. Let me just find that story for you. Okay, so here we are. The European Union Commissioner for Budget and Administration, Johannes Hahn, today confirmed that the rule of law mechanism has been triggered against Hungary following legislative reforms, which reduce the independence of the judiciary and of society more generally, and specifically legislation relating to women and minorities. If upheld, monies could be withheld from Hungary, although the amount would be dependent on the perceived impact on the EU's budget. The implication is that funding from Europe has been funneled away from intended recipients and that the EU has to ensure its funds are used appropriately. This process will take a period of some months. Belarus, we learned today, is contemplating changes to the death penalty. The Belarusian lower house of parliament today agreed to make legislative changes to make the wider use of a death penalty for acts of terrorism following recent actions by activists who sabotaged the railway network to help prevent the movement of Russian forces into Ukraine. The proposal now goes forward to be ratified by the upper house and by the leader, Alexander Lukashenko. House Speaker Vladimir Andyshenko said that the measure was aimed at preventing the increase of instability, as he called it, in Belarus. The crackdown on perceived acts of terrorism has included individuals being sentenced under terrorism legislation for acts such as throwing red paint at an official's car or throwing a brick at a prosecutor's window, something which may previously have been treated as an act of hooliganism. If this legislation passes, it will have a significant impact on protests within the country. Now, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar has been talking today to the STUC about fire and rehire, which of course is covered by UK employment law. He said to the STUC that a Labour government would change employment law on day one to avoid a repeat of the mass sacking of P&O Ferries seafarers. That company, P&O, prompted outrage last month by sacking 800 seafarers before replacing them with cheaper agency staff. Speaking to the STUC Congress in Aberdeen, Anas Sarwar said his party would immediately change regulations to ensure such a sacking could not happen again. A general election is expected by the end of January 2025 at the latest. The Scottish Government, meanwhile, is committed to holding a referendum on independence during the first half of the current Parliament, i.e. probably by the end of 2023. Those workers kept their company going, Mr. Sarwar said, kept the company going, demonstrating loyalty to that company and got no hint of that loyalty in return. For them to be callously sacked over Zoom, and for many of them to be ambushed on ships faced with individuals in balaclavas and handcuffs, it's disgusting and shameful, it's criminal, it cannot be allowed to happen again, he added. It's also a powerful reminder of why trade unions matter, and also a reminder of why political change matters in this country too. He said, the next Labour government on day one has to make sure it has a law to make sure the law is robust enough and on the side of workers and not the employers to make sure this never happens again. However, what Mr. Sarwar failed to mention is that an independent Scotland could also pass legislation to end fire and rehire. Under devolution, of course, Westminster keeps employment law as that's a reserved matter. Shielding to end by the 31st of May. The highest risk list, formerly known as the shielding list, will be formally ended at the end of May as a result of the success of the vaccination programme and the introduction of new treatments for COVID-19. The decision has been taken following a careful review of growing clinical evidence by a team of specialist clinicians. It shows that for the vast majority of those on the list, the risk of hospitalisation or death from COVID-19 has been significantly reduced and is no greater than for the general public. For some time now, the clinical advice has been for those on the high risk list to follow the same guidance as everyone else in Scotland unless specifically advised otherwise by their GP or another clinician. The list is not being used to identify people who are eligible or for vaccination priority or new treatments, and the NHS will continue to be able to contact those people when needed. Support remains in place for those who are immunosuppressed and who may still have some reduced immunity. This group are likely to need greater general protection from a range of infections in addition to the COVID-19. Wellbeing support is also available for those on the list, and the Scottish Government has allocated an additional £120,000 to the British Red Cross to fund their Connecting with You service to help people reconnect with activities and friends to rebuild their confidence in going out again and helping them to regain a better quality of life. The Distance Aware scheme is in place to provide free badges and lanyards to people who wish to show others that they would welcome additional space and extra care while out in public. The Chief Medical Officer will shortly write to everyone on the list to advise them of the change and to signpost them to ongoing support. And that's about it for tonight. So thank you for watching. Sorry for the late start. That was my fault. But we have just a short show anyways. We haven't invited any guests on to join you. So my colleague Andrew will be back with Scotland at 7 tomorrow with the latest news as it emerges. So once again, it remains for me to first of all thank you all for watching, and especially to thank those of you who are contributing to keeping Broadcasting Scotland going. We do need income from our subscribers because that's really our only source of income, and the link which you can see on the screen below will take you to our website, and if you would like to contribute a monthly standing order of whatever you can afford, that would be great. Gratefully appreciated. We did have a great deal of difficulty paying some bills this month, and we thank you. There's been some help has come in response to that call, so we have been able to pay some vital bills, but it's always back to square one again for us because as we all know, the electricity and gas bills are going up for us as well as they are for everybody else. So we still need to have your donations, so thank you. And also, if you could help to extend to spread the word on what we're doing at Broadcasting Scotland through your social media. Let's try and get more people watching the programmes. And remember, the more money we bring in, the more programmes we'll make. If you're just watching us for the first time, you should know that we're all volunteers at the station, so the money that comes in is entirely being spent on programme making. It's not been spent on freebies for the team, sadly. Okay, so thanks for watching, and do your best to help, and we'll do our best to keep broadcasting for Scotland. Okay, so that's it from me tonight. Thanks for watching, and we're back again, Scotland at 7 on Thursday. Bye.